The mop bucket scraped against the polished floor of Naval Special Warfare Command, its metallic echo bouncing off walls lined with commendations and warrior photographs. Lieutenant Commander Vasquez barely glanced up from his coffee as the janitor wheeled past, another invisible face in the machinery of base operations. The cleaning woman moved with peculiar precision, her movements economical and purposeful in a way that didn't quite match her weathered coveralls and steel-toed boots. "Look at that," Vasquez muttered to his teammate, gesturing with his ceramic mug. "Even the help around here thinks they're tactical." The woman's coveralls bore a small, faded patch on the shoulder, barely visible beneath years of industrial washing and wear. To most eyes, it looked like standard maintenance crew identification. But something about the way she carried herself, the deliberate spacing of her steps, made Senior Chief Ramirez pause mid-conversation. The patch was wrong. Not wrong in the sense of counterfeit or misplaced, but wrong in a way that made the hair on Ramirez's neck stand at attention. The colors were correct, muted olive and black with silver threading, but the unit designation made no sense. The numbers and symbols referenced something that shouldn't exist, at least not anymore. His memory pulled at fragments of classified briefings, whispered rumors in ready rooms, stories that were never officially confirmed or denied. The janitor finished her work near the operations board, her eyes never directly focusing on the classified material, yet somehow Ramirez got the impression she'd cataloged every detail. Her hands moved with the same steady rhythm as her mop, but there was something else, calluses in specific patterns, scars across her knuckles that spoke of training far beyond custodial work. When she turned to empty her bucket, Ramirez caught sight of her profile, and his blood went cold. The face was older, weathered by time and circumstances, but the bone structure was unmistakable. High cheekbones, a slight scar above the left eyebrow, and eyes that seemed to calculate distances and angles even while focused on mundane tasks. Ramirez had seen that face before, in briefing photos and classified files that had been sealed and buried so deep that mentioning them could end careers. "Jesus Christ," he whispered, his coffee cup forgotten in his suddenly trembling hand. The janitor paused at his words, her head tilting slightly as if she'd heard something in his voice that others might miss. For just a moment her eyes met his, and in that brief contact he saw recognition. Not surprise, not fear, but the quiet acknowledgement of someone who had been waiting for this moment, perhaps for years. The patch on her shoulder wasn't maintenance crew identification at all. It was a ghost, a remnant of operations that had never officially existed, worn by someone who had supposedly died in a desert that wasn't supposed to be a battlefield. The woman they called Phoenix was cleaning floors at Naval Special Warfare Command, and nobody had noticed except him. Ramirez's hand moved instinctively toward his radio, but stopped. Some conversations couldn't happen over standard channels. Some truths were too dangerous for normal protocols. The janitor, Phoenix, continued her work, but now every movement seemed loaded with significance. The way she angled her bucket near the classified disposal unit, the timing of her appearance during shift changes, the almost supernatural ability to remain invisible while occupying the most sensitive spaces on the base. The SEAL teams pride themselves on their situational awareness, their ability to read environments and detect threats. Yet somehow, a legend had been walking among them for months, possibly years, disguised as the most overlooked person in the facility. Vasquez continued his conversation about weekend plans, oblivious to the fact that he just insulted one of the most decorated pilots in the history of special operations, someone whose official death had been a carefully constructed lie. Phoenix finished cleaning the area around their table, her movements never hurried, never suspicious. But as she passed Ramirez's chair, she let her fingers brush against the patch on her shoulder, a gesture so subtle that anyone else would have missed it. It was acknowledgement and warning combined. She knew that he knew, and what happened next would depend on his choices. The cleaning cart rolled away down the corridor, leaving behind only the faint scent of industrial disinfectant and the weight of secrets that could reshape everything they thought they understood about their own organization. The cafeteria buzzed with its usual morning energy as Phoenix worked her way between tables, collecting trash and wiping surfaces with the same methodical attention to detail. The seals barely registered her presence. To them, she was part of the furniture, as unremarkable as the coffee machines or motivational posters lining the walls. But Ramirez watched her with new eyes, cataloging every detail that he'd previously overlooked. Her gait favored the left leg slightly, consistent with reports of shrapnel damage from an IED blast in Syria. The way she held her shoulders spoke of someone accustomed to carrying heavy flight gear. Most telling were her hands. They moved with the precise muscle memory of someone who had spent thousands of hours on aircraft controls, adjusting switches and managing complex systems under extreme stress. These weren't the hands of a career custodian. "You're starring," Vasquez observed, following his teammate's gaze to where Phoenix emptied another waste basket. "What, you got a thing for the cleaning lady now?" The joke fell flat, dying in the space between them as Ramirez continued his silent observation. Something was building in the room's atmosphere, a tension that most people couldn't identify but that made trained operators uncomfortable without understanding why. Phoenix moved to clean the area near the personnel board, where photographs of active duty members hung in neat rows. Her cloth paused for just a fraction longer than necessary over one particular section, the memorial wall, where images of fallen warriors were displayed with their dates of service and sacrifice. There was a gap there, Ramirez noticed, a space where a frame had once hung but had been quietly removed. The outline was still visible on the painted wall, like a ghost image of someone whose story had been officially erased. The radio in the operations center crackled to life, breaking the morning routine with an urgent transmission. All units, this is Control. We have an unscheduled aircraft approaching restricted airspace, bearing 270, altitude unknown. Pilot not responding to radio contact. All available personnel to stations." The announcement sent a ripple of activity through the cafeteria as off-duty operators reached for their gear. But Phoenix remained focused on her work, showing no reaction to what should have been an alarming development. Vasquez pushed back from his table, already reaching for his tactical vest. Another lost tourist in a Cessna, probably. Should be interesting to watch the interceptors scare them back to civilian airspace. But Ramirez noticed that Phoenix had subtly adjusted her position, now facing the large windows that provided a view of the flight line. Her body language suggested she was listening to something the rest of them couldn't hear: radio frequencies, engine signatures, atmospheric conditions that meant more to her than they would to anyone else in the room. The sound came first as a low rumble on the horizon, growing steadily stronger. It wasn't the familiar whine of the base's regular aircraft or the heavy throb of transport helicopters. This was something different, something that made the windows vibrate with a frequency that spoke of raw power barely contained. Phoenix set down her cleaning supplies and stepped closer to the glass, her reflection ghostly in the morning light streaming through the facility. "That's not a Cessna," Ramirez said, his voice tight with sudden concern. The sound was building into something that felt more like an approaching storm than standard aircraft operations. Other personnel in the cafeteria began to notice, conversations dying as heads turned toward the windows. The base's air defense systems should have been tracking whatever was approaching, but the continued radio silence suggested either a massive system failure or something else entirely, something that existed in the gaps between official protocols and acknowledged capabilities. Phoenix pressed her palm against the window glass, and for the first time since Ramirez had recognized her, she smiled. It wasn't the expression of someone watching a potential crisis unfold. It was the look of someone who had been waiting for a very specific moment, and who finally saw all the pieces falling into place exactly as planned. The aircraft appeared as a dark speck against the morning sky, moving with a velocity that defied easy identification. Standard flight patterns around the base followed predictable approaches, But this craft was cutting through restricted airspace with the confidence of something that belonged there, or something that didn't care about the consequences of trespassing. The base's defensive systems remained silent, no interceptors scrambling to investigate, no emergency protocols activating despite the obvious breach of security. Vasquez lowered his binoculars with a confused frown. Controls not responding, no fighters launching, no alerts going out. It's like they want this thing to land. The aircraft was close enough now to reveal its distinctive silhouette, angular, predatory, with lines that didn't match any standard military aircraft in current service. The engines generated a sound that seemed to come from inside the listener's chest, a harmonic vibration that suggested technology beyond conventional propulsion systems. Phoenix turned away from the window, her moment of observation complete. She returned to her cleaning cart with the same unhurried efficiency she'd shown all morning, but now her movements carried a different weight. She was no longer simply maintaining her cover, she was preparing for something. The way she adjusted the cart's position, the angle at which she positioned her cleaning supplies, even the path she chose through the cafeteria tables suggested tactical thinking rather than janitorial routine. Phoenix 1-7, this is Tower Control. The radio transmission cut through the facility's communications with startling clarity. It wasn't coming from the base's standard frequency channels, but from speakers throughout the building that most people didn't even know existed. The call sign sent a jolt of recognition through anyone with sufficient security clearance to understand what they were hearing. Phoenix 1-7 had been declared KIA 3 years earlier, along with the entire experimental squadron that had never officially existed. The woman with the mop cart straightened at the sound of her call sign, shedding the careful posture of a maintenance worker like she was removing a costume that no longer served its purpose. Her shoulders squared, her chin lifted, and suddenly the weathered coveralls looked less like civilian work clothes and more like the most effective camouflage ever employed on American soil. She was still the same person who had been invisible for months, but now she was visible by choice rather than necessity. Phoenix 1-7 copies Tower Control, approaching for landing, runway 27, requesting ground crew and secure hangar assignment. Her voice carried clearly across the cafeteria, speaking into a communications device that none of the watching SEALs had seen her produce. The words were crisp, professional, and delivered with the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. The transformation was so complete that several operators actually took a step backward, as if they were seeing her clearly for the first time. Ramirez felt his throat constrict as the implications crashed over him. The approaching aircraft, the radio silence from standard control channels, the woman who had been hiding in plain sight, it all formed a picture that his training told him was impossible, but that his instincts recognized as the most dangerous kind of truth. Phoenix hadn't been cleaning floors as some form of penance or cover. She'd been waiting, maintaining readiness for a mission that was finally beginning to unfold. The aircraft touched down with barely a whisper of tire contact, demonstrating the kind of precision that came from thousands of hours in the cockpit. Its engine spooled down with a sound like distant thunder fading into silence, and ground crews that nobody had seen arrive began moving with practiced efficiency toward the mysterious craft. The entire base seemed to shift into a different operational mode, as if layers of classification were peeling away to reveal systems and protocols that existed beyond normal military structure. The morning sun streaming through the cafeteria windows caught the insignia on Phoenix's coveralls, and suddenly, the faded patch was clearly visible to everyone in the room. The unit designation that had puzzled Ramirez earlier now stood out with sharp clarity. A stylized bird rising from flames, surrounded by stars that didn't match any standard military constellation. Below it, barely legible after years of washing, were the words that made every operator in the room reconsider everything they thought they knew about their own organization. Death rides the sky. Lieutenant Commander Vasquez set his coffee cup down with shaking hands, the ceramic making a small clicking sound that seemed impossibly loud in the sudden quiet. He'd heard whispers about Phoenix Squadron during his early years in special operations, stories that were always denied by anyone with the authority to know the truth. According to legend, they were test pilots and operators who flew missions that existed in the spaces between official acknowledgement and plausible deniability. Their aircraft were prototypes, their targets were ghosts, and their successes were never celebrated because their failures could never be admitted. "Ma'am," Ramirez said carefully, his voice carrying the respect of someone addressing a superior officer rather than base personnel, "I think we need to clear the area." It wasn't a request or suggestion. The radio traffic and aircraft arrival suggested operations that required security levels beyond the clearance of most people in the room. Phoenix nodded once, a gesture that contained both approval and command authority, before speaking into her communications device again. "Control, Phoenix 17 requests immediate lockdown of all non-essential personnel. Begin classification protocol Delta 7. The response was immediate. Klaxons began sounding throughout the facility, and blast doors that most people didn't know existed began sliding closed. The transformation of Naval Special Warfare Command from routine training facility to Black Operations Site was happening so smoothly that it seemed choreographed, as if this moment had been rehearsed countless times over the years. The SEALs moved with professional efficiency toward designated secure areas, their morning routine forgotten in the face of protocols that superseded normal base operations. But as they filed out of the cafeteria, more than one operator cast backward glances at the woman who had served them coffee and cleaned their tables for months. She was removing her coveralls now, revealing a flight suit underneath that bore the same mysterious insignia, but with additional markings that suggested rank and authority beyond anything they had imagined possible. Phoenix stood in the empty cafeteria, surrounded by abandoned breakfast trays and newspapers that would never report the story unfolding around her. Through the windows, her aircraft waited on the tarmac like a sleeping predator, its unusual lines suggesting capabilities that existed at the very edge of current technology. The morning light reflected off its surface in patterns that didn't quite make sense, as if the craft existed partially outside normal visual perception. For the first time in 3 years, Major Elena Phoenix Constantin was home. The secure briefing room 3 levels below the main facility had been activated for the first time since its construction, dust covers pulled away from equipment that existed in no official inventory. Major Constantin stood at the head of a conference table that had been designed for meetings that never happened, briefings for missions that never existed, and decisions that could never be acknowledged. The flight suit she wore beneath her discarded coveralls bore insignia that told a story of service beyond the normal boundaries of military recognition. 6 men entered the room, each carrying security credentials that existed in databases only a handful of people were authorized to access. Admiral Harrison led the group, his presence alone indicating the gravity of whatever situation had triggered Phoenix Squadron's return from official death. Behind him came representatives from agencies that preferred to remain unnamed, their suits and bearing marking them as the kind of officials who shaped policy from shadows and made decisions that presidents could plausibly deny. "Major Constantin," Admiral Harrison said, his voice carrying the weight of relief mixed with apprehension, "your resurrection comes at a particularly crucial time." The holographic display at the center of the table flickered to life, showing satellite imagery and intelligence reports that painted a picture of international crisis beyond the scope of conventional military response. The images were classified beyond normal security levels, showing activities in regions where American forces were not supposed to operate, conducted by adversaries who were not supposed to exist. Constantin studied the intelligence with the focused attention of someone reading her own orders. 3 years of officially being dead had not diminished her ability to process complex tactical information, to see patterns and possibilities that escaped other analysts. Her fingers moved over the holographic controls with practiced ease, manipulating data streams and satellite feeds to build a comprehensive picture of what had changed during her absence from active operations. The Kozlov group has been more active than our standard intelligence networks detected, she said, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had faced this particular enemy before. Their acquisition of advanced aircraft technology has upset the balance we've worked to maintain. The Mumbai incident wasn't terrorism, it was a field test. The officials around the table exchanged glances that confirmed her assessment, and their expressions suggested that the Mumbai incident was only the beginning of a larger pattern. The holographic display shifted to show aircraft that defied easy categorization, their designs incorporating technology that shouldn't exist in any nation's current capability. But Konstantin recognized the engine signatures, the flight characteristics, the tactical applications that made these craft more dangerous than their specifications suggested. She had encountered similar technology 3 years earlier, during the mission that had officially killed her and dismantled Phoenix Squadron. They're not just building better aircraft, she continued, highlighting specific elements of the intelligence data. They're building them for missions that conventional forces can't counter. High-altitude insertion into denied areas, stealth capabilities that defeat our current detection systems, and payload capacities that suggest strategic rather than tactical applications. The implications hung in the air like a toxic cloud, made more dangerous by the fact that normal diplomatic and military channels were inadequate to address the threat. Admiral Harrison leaned forward, his hands clasped tightly enough to show white knuckles. Phoenix Squadron was disbanded because the oversight committees believed your methods were too extreme, your operational parameters too broad. The political climate demanded accountability that your mission structure couldn't provide. The words carried the weight of old arguments and bureaucratic decisions that had prioritized political considerations over operational necessity. Konstantin's smile was thin, containing years of frustration compressed into a single expression. And now, those same committees are discovering that some threats require extreme responses, and that accountability is a luxury we can't afford when facing adversaries who don't acknowledge international law. The Mumbai incident had demonstrated the inadequacy of conventional responses to unconventional warfare, and the intelligence on the table suggested that more such incidents were inevitable without direct intervention. Phoenix Squadron never officially existed, said one of the unnamed officials, his voice carrying the careful precision of someone accustomed to constructing plausible denials. Your aircraft, your missions, your personnel records, everything was compartmentalized beyond normal military structure. Reactivating the squadron means acknowledging capabilities that we've spent 3 years denying. The political implications were as complex as the operational ones, requiring careful coordination between agencies that normally operated independently. The holographic display shifted again, this time showing the aircraft that had landed earlier. Its specifications existed in no public database, its capabilities extending beyond the current boundaries of acknowledged technology. Phoenix Squadron had been equipped with prototypes that incorporated advances in propulsion, stealth, and electronic warfare systems that remained classified at levels beyond traditional military clearance. Reactivating the squadron meant bringing those technologies back into active service, with all the security concerns that implied. Konstantin stood and moved to the window that provided a view of the secure hangar where her aircraft waited. The question isn't whether Phoenix Squadron should exist, she said, her reflection visible in the reinforced glass. The question is whether we're prepared to acknowledge that we've been fighting a war that was never officially declared, against enemies who don't officially exist, using methods that can't be officially sanctioned. The morning light reflected off her flight suit's insignia, casting shadows that seemed to move independently of her position. The War Phoenix Squadron had been created to fight had never ended, despite official declarations and political pronouncements. It had simply moved into spaces where conventional forces couldn't follow, conducted by adversaries who understood that the most effective battles were fought in the gaps between acknowledgement and denial. Constantine had spent 3 years preparing for this moment, maintaining readiness for a recall that she had known would eventually come. The only question was whether the officials responsible for her squadron's disbandment were finally prepared to admit that they had been wrong. Admiral Harrison activated a secure communication channel, his authorization codes enabling contact with decision-makers whose names appeared in no public records. "Phoenix 17 is back online," he said into the encrypted microphone. "Request immediate reactivation of squadron assets and personnel." The response was swift and decisive, carrying the authority of leadership that operated beyond normal governmental oversight. Phoenix Squadron would fly again, not because the political climate had changed, but because the alternative was unacceptable. The transformation of Naval Special Warfare Command continued throughout the morning as personnel who had supposedly been reassigned or retired began arriving through channels that bypassed normal base security. These were Phoenix Squadron's original members, pilots, technicians, and support staff, whose official deaths had been as carefully constructed as their commanding officers. They moved with the purposeful efficiency of professionals who had been waiting for this moment, checking equipment and reviewing procedures that had been kept current despite official non-existence. Major Constantine walked through the secure hangar complex, greeting team members who had maintained their skills and readiness through 3 years of official limbo. Each face told a story of sacrifice that extended beyond normal military service, of commitment to missions that could never be publicly acknowledged or celebrated. The reunion was subdued, marked by professional courtesy rather than emotional displays, because these operators understood that their return to active duty meant facing threats that had only grown more dangerous during their absence. Captain Miranda Torres, Phoenix 23, had spent her officially dead years working as a civilian flight instructor, maintaining her edge through aerobatic competitions and experimental aircraft testing. Her return to squadron duty required no adjustment period. She fell back into tactical procedures with the muscle memory of thousands of training hours that had never appeared in any official record. The aircraft she had flown before disbandment waited in the hangar like a faithful animal, its systems maintained by technicians who had continued their work despite having no official authorization or budget. The Kozlov Group's new aircraft performed differently than our previous intelligence indicated, Torres reported, reviewing updated threat assessments on a secure tablet. Their pilots have improved significantly, and their tactical doctrine suggests training by advisors with advanced knowledge of our operational methods. The implication was clear. Phoenix Squadron was no longer facing adversaries who were simply well-equipped, but enemies who had learned from previous encounters and adapted their strategies accordingly. Chief Warrant Officer Jackson Phillips, Phoenix 3-1, emerged from beneath one of the squadron's aircraft with the satisfied expression of a mechanic who had found his equipment exactly as he had left it. His officially non-existent years had been spent maintaining readiness for a recall he had never doubted would come, keeping current with advances in aircraft technology and electronic warfare systems. The tools of his trade had evolved during the squadron's dormant period, but the fundamental skills remained unchanged. "All aircraft are mission-ready," Phillips reported, his voice carrying the confidence of someone who took personal responsibility for mechanical reliability. "The new threat environment requires some system upgrades, but the basic airframes remain superior to anything our adversaries are currently fielding." The pride in his voice reflected years of work on machines that represented the cutting edge of American aerospace capability, aircraft that existed at the intersection of engineering excellence and operational necessity. The Secure Communications Center buzzed with activity as intelligence reports flowed in from sources that appeared in no official directory. The Kozlov Group's activities had escalated beyond the Mumbai incident, with confirmed sightings of their advanced aircraft in airspace over 3 different continents. Their operational tempo suggested preparation for something larger than isolated attacks or demonstrations of capability, a campaign that would require sustained response by forces capable of operating in denied areas and contested airspace. Konstantin assembled her squadron in the main briefing theater, a space designed for presentations that would never appear in official transcripts or congressional records. The officers who filled the seats represented the highest levels of tactical aviation skill, but their true qualification was the ability to operate beyond the boundaries of acknowledged military doctrine. Each had been selected not just for technical proficiency, but for the psychological resilience required to conduct missions that existed in moral and legal gray areas, where normal military guidance provided no clear direction. The Kozlov Group has acquired aircraft technology that challenges our air superiority, she began, the holographic displays showing intelligence that painted a sobering picture of adversarial capability. More significantly, they've demonstrated willingness to use that technology in ways that conventional deterrence cannot address. Our response requires operational flexibility that doesn't exist within normal command structure or rules of engagement. The mission briefing that followed covered targets and objectives that existed in no official database, supported by intelligence gathered through methods that appeared in no standard collection procedures. Phoenix Squadron would operate in the spaces between official military action and civilian law enforcement, conducting missions that could be neither confirmed nor denied by the government they served. Success would be measured not in conventional terms of victory or defeat, but in the maintenance of strategic balance that allowed normal diplomatic and military channels to continue functioning. The aircraft that Phoenix Squadron flew incorporated technology that existed at the very edge of current capability, propulsion systems that operated beyond conventional understanding, and electronic warfare suites that could defeat detection systems that hadn't yet been deployed. Flying these machines required not just exceptional skill, but the ability to think in 3 dimensions while managing systems that responded to thought as much as to physical control inputs. Training for Phoenix Squadron meant learning to operate at the limits of human capability, while flying aircraft that pushed the boundaries of physical possibility. As the briefing concluded, Konstantin looked out over her reassembled squadron with the satisfaction of a commander who had never doubted this moment would come. The years of official death had been preparation rather than exile, time spent maintaining readiness for operations that would test everything they had learned about the intersection of technology, tactics, and strategic necessity. The war they had been created to fight had never ended. It had simply waited for them to return. The first mission briefing took place in a secure facility that existed 3 levels below the official basement of Naval Special Warfare Command. The room had been designed for conversations that could never be recorded, decisions that could never be reviewed, and plans that could never be officially acknowledged. Major Konstantin stood before a holographic display that showed the kind of intelligence data that appeared in no standard briefing materials, gathered by sources whose methods remained classified beyond normal security protocols. The target was a facility in the Ural Mountains that didn't appear on any commercial satellite imagery, protected by air defense systems that officially didn't exist, and operated by personnel whose identities were carefully hidden behind layers of corporate structure and diplomatic immunity. The Kozlov Group had been using this location to test their advanced aircraft and train pilots whose skills rivaled those of the world's most elite military units. Intelligence suggested that something significant was being prepared, an operation that would demonstrate their capabilities in ways that conventional military forces couldn't effectively counter. The facility is hardened against conventional attack, Konstantin explained, highlighting specific defensive features that made standard military approaches ineffective. Their air defense network incorporates technology that can detect and engage stealth aircraft, and their fighter coverage includes pilots with combat experience against American aircraft. The implication was clear. This mission would require capabilities that existed beyond normal military parameters, aircraft and tactics that operated in the gray areas between acknowledged technology and experimental systems. Captain Torres studied the intelligence data with the focused attention of someone calculating approach vectors and threat envelopes. "Electronic countermeasures?" she asked, her fingers moving over the holographic controls to examine the facility's defensive systems in greater detail. The answer required access to information that existed in databases beyond normal military classification, intelligence gathered through methods that appeared in no standard collection procedures. "Comprehensive and adaptive," Konstantin replied, bringing up additional displays that showed the sophistication of the target's defensive capabilities. "They've studied our previous operational methods and developed countermeasures specifically designed to defeat Phoenix Squadron tactics. This won't be a repeat of previous missions. They know we're coming, and they're prepared for aircraft with our capabilities." The mission planning session continued for 6 hours, examining every aspect of an operation that would push Phoenix Squadron's aircraft and personnel to their operational limits. The approach would require flying through airspace defended by systems that could engage targets at ranges beyond conventional missile parameters, navigating electronic warfare environments that could disable unprotected aircraft systems, and conducting precision strikes against hardened targets while avoiding engagement with air defense systems that incorporated technology beyond current American capabilities. Chief Phillips provided technical briefings on aircraft modifications that had been implemented during the squadron's dormant period, upgrades to propulsion and electronic systems that improved performance while maintaining the stealth characteristics that made Phoenix Squadron missions possible. The aircraft they would fly incorporated advances in materials science and electronic warfare that existed at the classified edges of current technology, systems that required pilots with exceptional skill and judgment to operate effectively. "Mission window opens at 0300 local time," Konstantin announced, reviewing the final operational timeline that had been coordinated with intelligence assets and support personnel whose activities would never appear in official records. "Weather conditions will provide minimal cover, and satellite surveillance will be at peak coverage during our approach. This mission depends on speed, precision, and the element of surprise that comes from operating beyond adversarial expectations." The squadron dispersed to complete individual mission preparations, each pilot reviewing aircraft systems and mission profiles that had been refined through years of training that appeared in no official curriculum. The aircraft they would fly had been maintained in perfect readiness despite official non-existence, their systems updated and enhanced by technicians whose work remained classified beyond normal military oversight. Everything was ready for an operation that would test whether Phoenix Squadron's unique capabilities remained relevant in an evolving threat environment. Konstantin stood alone in the hangar as her pilots completed their pre-flight preparations, looking at aircraft that represented the intersection of American aerospace excellence and operational necessity. Each machine incorporated technology that pushed the boundaries of current capability, but their true significance lay in the missions they enabled, operations that existed in the spaces between official military action and civilian law enforcement, conducted by personnel who understood that some threats required responses beyond normal governmental oversight. The weight of command in Phoenix Squadron extended beyond normal military responsibility, because the missions they conducted existed outside standard chains of accountability and oversight. Success or failure would be measured not in conventional terms of victory or defeat, but in the maintenance of strategic balance that allowed normal diplomatic and military processes to continue functioning. The margin for error was essentially zero, because failure could not be officially acknowledged or explained. As 0300 approached, Phoenix Squadron prepared for their first mission in 3 years, launching into a conflict that had never officially ended against adversaries who weren't supposed to exist. The aircraft that lifted off from the secure runway carried no markings that appeared in any official registry, flown by pilots whose names were listed in no public record, conducting an operation that would never be reported in any congressional briefing or military journal. They were ghosts flying against ghosts, maintaining a balance of power that existed in the spaces between acknowledgement and denial. The night sky over the Atlantic was crystal clear as Phoenix Squadron climbed to operational altitude, their aircraft invisible to conventional radar and silent in the electromagnetic spectrum where most detection systems operated. The formation maintained perfect spacing through automated systems that coordinated each aircraft's position without radio communication that could be intercepted or analyzed. They flew through international airspace that was monitored by multiple nations, yet remained undetected by surveillance systems that represented the current pinnacle of military technology. Major Constantine monitored squadron status through encrypted data links that provided real-time information about aircraft performance, pilot condition, and mission parameters without generating the electronic signatures that conventional communications would produce. Each Phoenix Squadron aircraft operated as both an individual weapons system and part of a coordinated network that could adapt to changing tactical situations without the delays inherent in normal command and control procedures. The technology was years ahead of anything currently fielded by acknowledged military forces. Phoenix 2-3 confirm electronic warfare suite status. Constantine transmitted through a quantum-encrypted channel that existed in no standard communications protocol. The response came through systems that operated beyond conventional understanding of radio communication, carried by technologies that remained classified at levels beyond normal military oversight. Captain Torres confirmed readiness to engage defensive systems that incorporated the most advanced countermeasures currently known to exist. The approach to Ural target airspace required navigation through detection networks that covered approaches from all conventional directions, monitored by personnel trained to recognize the signatures of stealth aircraft, and equipped with technology specifically designed to defeat American aircraft capabilities. Phoenix Squadron's route was planned to exploit gaps in coverage that existed for only minutes at a time, requiring precise timing and coordination that left no margin for mechanical failure or pilot error. Initial defense perimeter in 30 seconds, Torres reported, her voice carrying the calm professionalism of someone who had trained for this moment through years of simulation and rehearsal. The aircraft around her adjusted their formation automatically, each pilot monitoring systems that provided information about threat status and engagement parameters. The defensive network they were approaching represented the most sophisticated air defense system ever deployed outside of acknowledged military installations. Constantine felt the familiar sensation of combat awareness flooding her consciousness, the heightened state of perception that came from operating at the very edge of human and mechanical capability. Every system reading had meaning. Every change in aircraft performance provided information about environmental conditions and threat status. Flying a Phoenix Squadron aircraft meant becoming part of a machine that responded to thought as much as to physical control inputs, requiring integration between pilot and technology that existed beyond normal training parameters. The first defensive layer consisted of detection systems that operated in frequency ranges beyond conventional radar, monitoring approaches through multiple electromagnetic spectrums simultaneously. Phoenix Squadron aircraft appeared as faint shadows in this surveillance network, detectable only to operators with extensive training in recognizing stealth aircraft signatures. The squadron's passage would be noted but not immediately identified, providing crucial minutes of uncertainty that would complicate defensive response. Electronic countermeasures active, Phillips reported from Phoenix 3-1, his aircraft systems generating interference patterns that would confuse and delay defensive targeting systems. The countermeasures were subtle, designed to appear as natural atmospheric interference rather than deliberate jamming that would immediately alert defenders to the presence of attacking aircraft. Success depended on maintaining the illusion that the approaching squadron was a technical glitch, rather than a coordinated military operation. The Ural facility appeared on their targeting displays as a complex of structures that incorporated defensive features designed to resist conventional attack methods. But Phoenix Squadron's weapons systems operated beyond conventional parameters, delivering effects through methods that appeared in no standard military doctrine. The target's hardened construction would provide no protection against weapons that operated outside normal physical laws, guided by technology that remained classified beyond current understanding. Target acquisition confirmed, Constantin announced, her aircraft systems identifying specific structures within the facility complex that contained the technology and personnel Phoenix Squadron had been sent to eliminate. The targeting information was distributed automatically to other squadron aircraft, each pilot receiving mission-specific data that would guide their individual attacks while maintaining coordination of the overall mission. There would be no second chance. The mission required complete success on the first attempt. The final approach required flying through air defense systems that incorporated the most advanced technology available to adversarial forces, guided by operators trained specifically to engage Phoenix Squadron aircraft. The electronic warfare environment was unlike anything they had encountered in previous missions, requiring constant adjustment of aircraft systems to maintain stealth characteristics, while navigating towards targets protected by defenses that operated beyond conventional military capability. Success would depend on pilot skill, aircraft performance, and tactical coordination that existed at the very limits of current possibility. The attack began with electronic warfare systems that disabled the facility's defensive networks through methods that appeared in no standard military manual. Phoenix Squadron's aircraft delivered their effects simultaneously, coordinating through quantum-encrypted communications that operated faster than conventional defensive systems could respond. The target's air defense network failed in seconds, leaving the facility vulnerable to weapons that operated beyond the boundaries of acknowledged technology. Target destroyed, came the confirmation from multiple aircraft as their mission-specific weapons found their marks with precision that defied conventional targeting systems. The Kozlov Group's advanced aircraft and training facilities were eliminated in an attack that would appear to observers as simultaneous system failures and accidents rather than coordinated military action. No evidence would remain to indicate American involvement. No intelligence could be gathered to identify the attacking force or its capabilities. The withdrawal from target airspace proceeded as smoothly as the approach, with Phoenix Squadron aircraft disappearing from defensive sensors before anyone could determine what had attacked the facility. Their return flight would follow different routes through airspace that was monitored by different nations, ensuring that no pattern could be established to identify their origin or destination. The mission had been completed with the precision and invisibility that defined Phoenix Squadron operations. As they crossed back into international airspace,